Thank you all for spending your Friday afternoon with us. I'm thrilled to hear there's quite a bit of interest with meadowscaping. So before I jump into the meadowscaping presentation, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize, honor, and thank the original caretakers of this land that we're focused on and their extensive knowledge in regards to the land. Prior to European settlement, the Willamette Valley was covered with mosaic of oak woodlands, open savanna, prairie, and wetlands intermixed with stands of conifer habitats that were cared for by Indigenous land stewards with tools like fire, landscapes that we're hoping to reconnect with through meadowscaping and other restoration efforts. My district wishes to honor these original caretakers and commit to working with their descendants. So here I'm starting off with a little overview of my talk, and I should have mentioned in the beginning that there's going to be I think plenty of room for questions at the end, but also feel free to put those in the chat. I think that those will be watched for as they pop up. Happy to kind of deal with that either way. But first, I'm just going to go over why we might consider converting our landscapes to meadowscapes. Also think about and kind of share the partnership and related resources other folks can provide you if you're going through the transition in your landscape, designing considerations, planting considerations, and then maintenance considerations for meadowscapes. And this is one of my hardworking daughters helping maintain a little slice of lawn that we had since converted to a meadowscape. So this is a nice quote that I like to start with when talking about meadowscapes. I think this is why probably many of you are here. Folks are asking that we raise the bar on landscapes. In the past, we've asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now we're asking them to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. And I'm happy to share that meadowscaping can provide those services. So it's a nice quote from Douglas Ptolemy. In regards to why create a meadowscape, you might already have landed on many of these, and that might be why you're here. But I'd just like to share these benefits in case some haven't popped into folks' minds when they're thinking about changing their landscapes. Certainly, many do this for wildlife and biodiversity benefits. I always like to share facts about our solitary ground nesting bees, the mining bees, which are actually our most diverse family of bees on our continent. Most folks maybe more now know that now than before, but all of those are specialist foragers, meaning they need specific types of plants and sometimes even specific species. And two species are actually listed as the vulnerable on Ceres Red List and endemic to the Columbia Basin of those species. So it's certainly a boon to those really important pollinators, but also a host of other wildlife for sure. Of course, water and air quality benefits are often considered when we're thinking about landscaping. We'll talk, I'll show you another slide that kind of speaks to how meadowscapes can help manage stormwater a bit more than lawns. As well as, of course, we'll talk about the maintenance of meadowscapes, which don't, include as much mowing and whatnot, which is obviously an air quality issue. Also speak to water conservation because I'm mostly focused on native plants. There's a lot of benefits there and that they're well adapted to our climate and not needing regular watering after establishment. And I just spoke to the natural heritage of connecting to kind of past landscapes that once were prevalent and are now quite rare, unfortunately. And I say lower maintenance, and I don't want to say no maintenance. And certainly there's even lower maintenance options for landscapes. So I'll speak to that a little bit more. And this is just a graphic to showcase the stormwater management, carbon sequestration kind of benefits of native forbs and grasses versus our lawns. So right here on the kind of the left here, you can see Kentucky bluegrass swath, and then you can see in this graphic these dense depths of roots that are able to kind of provide organic matter and also a lot more infiltration into the soil, allowing for much much higher levels of stormwater management, infiltration of the soil. And the more and more climate scientists look into carbon sinks, the more and more we look at the soil and understand how important the soil is in kind of ensuring we keep that, carbon that is captured there and can even pull more carbon in depending on the plant life above and also the roots below and other practices. So thankfully, meadowscaping is a boon to that as well. This is just a list of different partners that were very critical in pulling together initial meadowscaping efforts and are great resources in a host of different ways. The Backyard Habitat Certification Program I'll speak to a little bit more. My co-author, Mark Griswold-Wilson, as well as a lot of different folks that served on scientific panels to kind of help pull together the information when we were hearing a demand and a need for native landscaping alternatives, and specifically folks asking for bunchgrass and wildflower alternatives to lawns. I'll speak really quickly to some of the demonstration sites and things we found, but of course, everything you're hearing in this talk are kind of best management practices and whatnot that we've landed on after doing different trials at those demonstration sites, as well as reaching out to other partners and hearing about what they're doing. Speak a little bit to sourcing plant materials and educational offerings, as well as signage if you're interested in kind of the benefit of that. So first, I just want to mention we went through a multi-year pilot project with the Backyard Habitat Certification Program, really leading the show and helping us identify landowners that were willing to work with us to help source different native plants and trial different site prep methods to mostly convert lawns, but sometimes convert different swaths of areas that are maybe just more weed infested with various plants that might be a bit more aggressive than your sodgrass lawn. And I'll speak to that a little bit more. And we went through and analyzed a lot of different pieces to the pie in regards to what to provide information-wise for soils, site prep methods, all of that you'll hear about in a moment. And I do want to make sure that you're aware that I'll be going, high level through all these different pieces, but there is a meadowscaping handbook that you can download for free off of West Multnomah's website. And I believe Becky or Heath from Marion SWCD will also provide you with the link for that. Either they've already done that or they'll do it afterwards. And if you also want an in-print version, we have them here at the office. I'm sad to say we got one right here. They had a binding issue and the pages just seemed to fly out. So we actually have to send them all back to our printer and get them redone. But these have been very popular in getting out the door, which is nice. The hard copies, if you wanted them, you do actually have to pay for the cost of printing and shipping, so they're not completely free. So take that as you may, and you also could visit our office and pick one up if you're close by. So I go through. This is the table of contents, and I'll give you the highlights basically from these different sections, including and starting with site planning. So folks might be coming at why they're wanting to do a meadowscape for various reasons. And I believe a meadowscape can, achieve all of those. It's just a matter of how much we want to prioritize which aspects, but everything from just, aesthetics or low maintenance wildlife habitat or stormwater treatment. And just when I'm talking to folks and trying to plan these things out, I encourage folks to really emphasize what is most important. if lower maintenance is the most important, sometimes I do steer landowners towards other landscapes that are even lower maintenance if they're interested, things that have layerings of shrubs and maybe even trees, because a meadow by nature, as I was mentioning in the land acknowledgement in the beginning, were maintained historically by disturbance, specifically fires that would regularly keep a habitat more open, or other disturbances like a wet meadow that is disturbed regularly from flooding, inundation, and a wetland or a streamside area. So there is some level of disturbance needed to keep your meadow a meadow. And also because it's an open habitat feature, there's open spots and there's shade. So that's not going to be weed free. I guess no landscape is ever going to be invasive free or weed free, or however you want to talk about the plants that you might not want there. So that's always going to be a component. Wildlife habitat wise, this is if wildlife habitat's the issue that you really want to address, I'll speak to how to kind of maybe best facilitate that. And not surprisingly, a lot of it's about having a diversity of things there for wildlife. And also just thinking about your project type. Some folks want just a low-lying ground cover, and we can speak to different native plants that can provide that feature. Some just want specifically only grass, and that's fine, but it's important to know that all of our native grasses are bunch grasses. So some folks aren't happy with the fact that we don't have like a sod forming type grass. So I just want to highlight that. And then a meadowscape is the combination of those bunch grasses and the wildflowers. And then, of course, you want to take into account, what kind of labor you have, both for installation, site prep, and maintenance. All those tools, materials budgets are always good to think about, and inventorying a site for all these different pieces that include, what's your sun exposure, very importantly, when you're thinking about which plants to select, and having the right plants in the right place. The weedy pressures are going to very much determine, what kind of site prep you're going to do. And other pressures such as pets and human pressures and human needs are really important to consider, especially in the urban environment. Dogs, cats, even squirrels. I've seen squirrels going through my meadow. So all those things are important to think about, and maybe also considering wildlife exclusion fencing and whatnot. And of course, your soil type and moisture regime is helpful to kind of figure out before you start. And then I always suggest starting small, and also thinking about using unused spaces to try it out and kind of put these little habitat patches in. There's a lot of different opportunities, and for a while here in Portland, we were really kind of pushing those kind of little curb strips that folks just don't even want to mow, and they just kind of go dormant as a really great opportunity to install a meadowscape. So for project design, we have a nice long list of different appropriate native available plants. And again, if aesthetics are really important, you're probably going to want to look through each of those, get to know them, and look at the different heights and variabilities. And if wildlife habitat, providing that is very important, definitely want to consider different bloom times and trying to cover as much as you can from, late winter, early spring, all the way to late fall for all those different pollinators looking for forage and habitat. And then also having a bunch grass, especially for the ground nesters that really like to use those spots under the bunch grasses. And then I just have a word of caution for aggressive plants, which we actually do have flagged in the Meadowscaping handbook at the end. We have these really nice long lists of species you could consider. And then just for aggressive plants, I love them in certain ways in certain places, but know that maybe, if you're concerned about your neighbor having it spread onto their property and they don't want that, you might not put the most aggressive plants on that boundary. or if, you're really trying to kind of have an annual meadow with a lot of delicate plants that are hard to establish, you're going to have to either kind of be weeding that, or maybe you just don't want to have that plant very close by that little patch. But again, if you have heavy weed pressures and you don't have a lot of time for maintenance, these are great plants that will self-seed and spread for you if you'd like them to. And and I should have mentioned with that last graphic, I had the bloom time chart showing colors as well as the bloom times. So in addition to the colors and bloom times, the other diversity of things to consider are flower shapes. So there's different kind of flower heads that provide different forage for different species. So that's another thing to kind of think about and try to include while you're designing which plants might be included. For sourcing plant materials, we do encourage sourcing natives for the wildlife reasons as well as climate reasons that I spoke to in regards to them not needing water after they're established. Typically, although with our heat domes, who knows, maybe we will have to keep watering things. When you're sourcing plants, just kind of asking where they're getting their plants from, what region. We do talk about eco types, and we're in the Willamette Valley ecozone for native plants, and that helps you know that those are kind of the plants that wildlife will be seeking, and also will be well adapted to our climate, at least our current climate. And then also asking about neonicotinoids. Those are widespread insecticides that are used widely on farms and urban landscapes, and they can be absorbed by plants and can be present in pollen and nectar, making them toxic to bees. And so that's something to be kind of mindful of and asking when you're sourcing. If you're able to work with different native plant sellers or your soil and water conservation district, you might be able to get wholesale orders together or get your plants at wholesale, which is much more affordable. So if you're able to do that, that's great. Seed packet distribution, thankfully, there's been more and more even small packets of seed that have been available over, this is for this program, I mean, we've been working on this for, well, almost 15 years, and it's been really great to see that kind of changing over time. For quite a while, we had to kind of try to source the seeds for folks and distribute them from from wholesale nurseries, but now there's a little bit more retail available for smaller packets. Okay. And then aesthetically, if pretty is a focus, which we all like, we want things that look nice, right? At least English aesthetic. These are some different tips we got from the landscapers that we worked with. Just thinking about having a smaller palette. So this kind of goes in a little bit of juxtaposition to having like a lot of diversity, but having a little bit smaller palette so you can have kind of some themes and have grouped plants. They talked a lot about having strategically located anchor plants, which are ones that, I think about mostly like perennials or bunch grasses that are going to stay there and have interest no matter what time in the season. Thinking about having kind of clear groupings like I was just speaking to, and then thinking about seasonal interests, noting that meadows are very dynamic or changing type landscapes. And to demonstrate that, got my co-author here at his landscaped meadowscape in his front yard. And you can see how he's incorporated, there's some shrubs here, but a good portion of this is a meadowscape. And this picture right here has got the Danthonia showing that the oak grass. Then a little bit later in the spring, we can see it pop with a lot of ranunculus and some camas. And there's the previous backyard habitat coordinator there in the background. So they're really fun to watch for that, but they also, at times might not look like you want them to look unless you kind of very strategically design it so it has that seasonal interest no matter what. Heavy use areas is something that we've heard is a need to think about. So having, if you're going to do something like in an area like a planting strip, making sure you have a place for folks to walk or pets to walk if it's in your backyard, like fenced off areas that they can have plenty of access, because if some of these plants, some of a small subset that are very aggressive can make it no matter what, but some of these plants will need to be kind of remain fairly untouched for most of the time while they're growing for them to kind of thrive and make it to their bloom. Certainly thinking about choosing the right heights for sites. There's certain things, there's certain native plants that can get quite tall, such as our Douglas aster and our Sedelcias. They're beautiful and wonderful plants, but depending on if there's like a view of sight issue or certainly a landscape issue, then you might want to be careful. And then of course, feel free to consider commingling natives and non-natives. That also provides a lot of different functionality for various wildlife and certainly a lot of aesthetic boom. This is one of the Azerty Society's home front yard. It's quite beautiful. So to get into site prep, just want to share, you're generally thinking about doing this typically in the spring through the fall, but you can do these site prep methods, most of them other times of the year as well, if that works better for you. Some look maybe not quite as pretty as others while they're going through the process. When we're doing smaller sites, for the most part, organic methods should work just fine. There are times where herbicide use was recommended for areas, especially that are maybe heavy weed pressured, maybe not just lawn and sod, but have a lot of invasive plants that would continue to compete and win out against any kind of native meadow plants you might put in there. But for the organic methods, and I've tried these all at different properties as it moved around, you can work with a sod cutter and do hand weeding and then add a top dressing of native soil after you kind of get through that weeding time. And this is kind of, again, multi-season, a spring through the fall type prep. Sheet mulching is one that, and I should say actually for the sod cutting, you could do that more just in the fall and then plant. So that's one nice benefit. If you want to keep that lawn or that landscape and you're not dealing with a bunch of invasive weeds that you're worried about controlling before you plant, that's a nice method, but it's certainly a more labor intensive method than sheet mulching, which I've got a little picture here, where you just lay down some cardboard, some pot manure, compost, and soil, and let basically the soil, critters do the work for you in actually, basically breaking down all that grass that might be underneath over time. The one drawback of this method is then you've got just kind of an open looking pile of dirt for some time if it's a very, a site that you can see. And of course, weeds love open piles of dirt. So there's going to be some hand weeding over time as you're waiting for that transition to happen. Solarizing is another option where you lay down this plastic here. It's obviously, the drawback is you're using a lot of plastic. It does effectively kill lawn after a while, but you have that plastic sitting there. And then of course, when you pull it up, you want to put that top dressing on, and you also will probably have some hand weeding to do for anything that was in that seed bank. And then again, like I was saying, if you're dealing with, and it really depends on the invasive plant that you're dealing with, how to best control it, but you might be looking at a spring spray and a fall spray at a minimum, and then some hand weeding before you can actually plant your meadow. And then for meadow establishment, we tried to do a lot just starting from seed, and we learned that was really not working for a lot of folks. A lot of times the seed was walking off with wildlife enjoying it, meaning it was getting eaten. Sometimes it just kind of like would get overtaken by weeds while we were waiting for the seeds to pop up, because most of our seeds in the Willamette Valley need cold stratification, meaning they're planted in the fall, but they need to go through a really cold snap, like through the winter, until they bloom in the spring. So that's a long time to have seed sitting out and waiting for that that time. And during that time, that's when a lot of the weeds come in, right? Of course, you know, if you're on any type of slope, that's not a great method, because then you're leaving your soils pretty denuded while you're waiting for that seed to pop up. So we really encourage folks, for the most part, to think about starting with plugs, so small plants, and thinking about perennials specifically, so those that will kind of hold their form for you while you're establishing a more diverse meadow. So thinking about bunch grasses as well as your perennial wildflowers. And again, clumping those species has both aesthetic value, but also has some wildlife value, because a lot of times we've seen, you know, pollinators like to visit, you know, the flowers by flowers right next to each other. Having some spacing that's appropriate is important. And then after you've got your plugs established, or even at the same time, going ahead and scratching your seeds in the fall and applying some fencing while that meadow gets established is just a pretty good recommendation across the board, regardless of your pressures. This is just a nice little sketch that we have in the handbook that shows the various kind of places you might think about having a meadow, and the beautiful, and these each come with a little list of species for if you've got a wetter area that maybe has some part shade, if you've got a front yard that you're really wanting to have some showy native species, there's a nice list there. And then there's the planting strip meadow that I've spoken to a little bit. And I think I've already mentioned this, but we have this list of species in the back with nice photos, and of course their moisture regime, their exposure, their height, and their time of bloom that you can use as a resource. And so let's say you've planned out your meadow, you've done your site prep, you've got it planted. Now you're just in maintenance mode. And you do, as I said, want to water for the first at least 1 to 2 years, I would say 2, while they're getting established, meaning they're getting their roots kind of as far down as they need them, and they're, you know, they're younger plants, so they're just more susceptible to kind of drought and other stressors. I also mentioned how meadows would typically be maintained with disturbance, and so we recommend at least a fall mow, and that can be, you know, if it's a really small meadow, it could just be with clippers, it could be with a string trimmer, it can be with a mower set at a high setting, but at least one of those in the fall, waiting for after the primary ground nesting season for birds, which is up in August 1st. And then also just know that many annuals will self-sow, and so if you want to have those self-sow, have at it, but just plan for knowing that those will spread here and there if you have any bare soil. So plan for that, and just know that because we have bare spots, there'll be weeds, so hand weeding will be needed here and there. For different challenges we've seen in meadowscaping, we've certainly seen, you know, some folks think it's beautiful and wonderful to have a meadow in your yard, and some people say, what are you doing? That looks all messy. That's all unkempt? Why are those grasses so tall? In fact, many cities even have a tall grass ordinance where you can get a fine if your grass is too tall. Thankfully in Portland, they've worked with us, and if it is a planned meadowscape that we can confirm with my organization or Backyard Habitat, then it's the tall grass ordinance is essentially waived for them. It's not that they're just not maintaining their grass and let it get tall and unruly. The maintenance can be a surprise to some folks. Some folks, and that's why I kind of tout that quite a bit, have the perception that because they're native to here and they're well climate adapted, they don't have to do any maintenance, but that's not true, as you just heard. And then the planting costs and availability had in the past been a bit of a barrier, but I'm happy to say it's been less and less one. There's more and more availability of native plants, and certainly reach out to your local SWCD if you're having a hard time sourcing those plants. Many of us do have plant sales. I believe Marion does, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong. East Multnomah certainly does. We do not manage our own plant sale right now, but there are others that do, as well as a host of other groups to make it a little bit more cost affordable. And of course, there's a great array of native plant nurseries that are now available, both wholesale and retail. And then lastly, we've found that the grass identification has really stumped folks, especially starting from seed. So I really recommend with those bunch grasses, when you get them in the ground, putting the label right there, watching them, getting to know them, and then also, of course, calling local experts if you're stumped, either SWCDs, master gardeners, and whatnot, to get those identifications confirmed. Sometimes people's lawn grass will grow up tall, like barnyard grass or whatever it might be, and people are having a hard time figuring out what should be there and what shouldn't. Oh, and on the public perception, also, I would say having some signage while you're establishing your meadow can go a long way if you're in a really publicly visible spot. I had done that when I established my first meadow when I was living in a really high traffic area, and that really helped kind of spread the word about what I was doing and help people understand while they were looking at a big patch of dirt for a little while. And then, of course, there's always further opportunity for learning about how we could better manage these landscapes. And we've also found great opportunities for engagement. If anyone here is from groups that are interested in that, especially if they're near an oak prairie meadow landscape, trying to kind of connect folks with that landscape on their own properties has been a really nice tool for meadowscaping. I'm open for questions. So I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna let Becky help me with the questions.
Great, thanks, Mary. That was awesome.
Oh, good.
I'm excited to get some meadowscaping done in my property. I think at least maybe a little section.
Yeah, I will say I started way too big for my first property, and then I got pregnant with my first child, and it was too much. My next one was smaller.
That's what I'm thinking. Start small. Okay, we do have some questions. Let me get up to the top here. What would be some examples of the aggressive plants that you mentioned?
So some that just kind of come top to mind are, let's see, Douglas aster is likes to spread a lot. Yarrow, a lot of folks that have ordered that, like Fleur de Lawn, that it's one that you can buy over the counter, has some native yarrow or some other yarrow species in the mix, and often your yard turns right into yarrow there. This is not native to the Willamette Valley, but I will say I had planted some beach daisy, which is a coastal variety, and that plant is beautiful, and it can be stomped all over. I used to live next to a college house, and all the kids would stomp all over it, or red solo cups everywhere, but those plants persisted and they spread. So, and then there's some of the grasses that would be on our list can spread a bit. Certainly, yeah, the fescue is one to kind of, it's not going to spread as much. The California oak grass will spread around, and then a lot of the annuals, like Gilias and Colomias, will kind of move around. But I wouldn't call those aggressive per se. I think the other ones I was speaking to are much more aggressive. And there's things like, like strawberries and kinnikinics that will like move around. I hesitate to call it aggressive because they're so low to the ground. They're not as in your face as those taller species that might kind of jump over to your neighbor's property and they won't miss it. Hope that helps. But there's others, and I should mention, maybe I already mentioned it, but in one of our lists, we do highlight, we bold the species that are particularly more aggressive. So.
Okay, next question. Do you have any recommendations for what kind of mulch to use?
Ooh, that's a good question. We just, a thin bark mulch, if you can find, I don't know if they have this, but certainly asking your haulers. A lot of times we're working on like larger projects for this. But if you can find, OMRI certified gives you that kind of organic certification. So that's always a little bit of a comfort knowing that there's kind of some checks and balances that person had to go through. And I don't know if they have this, but if you can get weed-free bark mulch dusting, that's wonderful too. I don't know if that is out there, but you certainly could always ask, especially if you're getting it from a hauler, like someone that's doing like compost and whatnot. But even if you're just getting it from your local nursery store, you can kind of ask their preference. That didn't help probably that much, but I do tend to look for OMRI when I'm getting things at home, just because that gives me a little added comfort.
Great, thank you. Next up, what would you consider a native soil? Is that something you would purchase at a garden store?
That'd be nice. So the native soil hypothetically would be the one that would have been on your site pre-development, right? So, and West Multnomah and Marion can provide you wonderful soil maps that tell you what soils were mapped and may be found on your site. However, when you get into the urban environment, it also often says urban complex, which means disturbed soil that was scraped off and we don't know much about it. So that's really not very helpful. But you can find, again, like your local haulers. I don't know the ones down in Salem as well, but you can talk to them and see if they've sourced anything locally nearby, and you can test your soil and try to get something kind of akin to that in regards to, you can explain. I have mostly clay, I've got some loam, and I actually have a little like quick and dirty how to do a soil ribbon and soil test in the Meadowscaping guide too. So you could try to match that if you're actually trying to remove soil or replace soil for whatever reason. So that's not that helpful, but that's kind of the best I can give for that.
Okay, next up, we have kind of a specific question, it looks like. This is awesome. How deep must the plantable soil be if we sheet mulch? We have a lawn underneath, which there is a burrito and some pipeline in a portion of the lawn. I assume we should not plant on top of those spots.
Yeah, the pipelines are usually pretty deep, but and a burrito? I don't know what that means.
I'm not sure what that means either.
Okay. Well, maybe is that like a French drain? Is that what a burrito is? Anyway,
I'm not sure. Lisa, if you are still with us, if you wanted to unmute and explain that we'd appreciate it.
Please. Okay. Well, in general, so I have given some specs for like septic fields, which is really tricky too, one that you don't want to go too deep. In regards to planting, when you've sheet mulched, after you've actually gone through the sheet mulching process, if you let it sit for 6 months and it's done its thing, it should be pretty settled. So it shouldn't be, if you did like a really robust sheet mulch, just say you even went 6 to 12 inches, that depth should have settled down quite a bit. So that's not going to give you much raised surface above any underground infrastructure that you might be concerned about. So certainly if there's things that are kind of below, that are close by, that you're concerned about, I would just go with those species that have like less of a root depth. A lot of the annuals and even a small subset of the perennials that are kind of shorter in stature helped show you how short their roots might be. It's not a perfect match by any means, but it's a way of kind of determining what to look at. In regards to bunch grasses, I would stay away from those in those areas. I would just go with the wildflowers and go with the shorter statute, and you probably should be okay. Not knowing what, but I'm saying that not knowing what a burrito is. I know what a burrito is for dinner, but I don't know what that is in the soil.
Okay, next up, I have an area that gets very wet and puddles during heavy rain, but it dries out a lot in the summer. Should I treat it as a wet meadow or something else?
Yeah, I would definitely do a drainage test on it. I'm guessing it may or may not be clay soils, which is why you're seeing it puddle, depending on what you've got going on. And in that regard, yeah, you can treat it as a wet meadow, but maybe not put like complete obligates, so those that have to have their feet wet all the time. But you can plant species that can kind of be found on the edges of those areas. So a great example would be like what I pick, you know, great camas or common camas, going with the camas that can be dried out for a short period of time, but likes that wet. And those are kind of well listed again, like in the appendix. They're the ones with the half raindrops. So those are the ones that can deal with some water or quite a bit of water, but don't need to be saturated all the time. And I also would recommend doing that. There's a soil infiltration test that you could do or the soil ribbon again, that can help you understand if you've got a lot of clay, or if it's really well drained and you're seeing puddling, then maybe you've got like a seep or a spring. But the fact that it dries out makes me feel like it's likely more like clay soil that isn't draining that well, and thus would just kind of have more of the seasonal wets.
Okay. You had mentioned putting signs up when you're doing this kind of a project. Is there somewhere that people can get signs?
Yeah, and I don't know, and my back bounces back to Marion a little bit, but I know we have signs. So if you're in our district, we have like a pollinator project happening. Xerces Society had a lot of wonderful signs for pollinator habitat. I believe you can still access those. We were working a lot more closely with them to distribute them at one point. And I don't know if they're still distributing those. So the Xerces Society is an invertebrate society, but it's not a society run by invertebrates, it's for invertebrates. They just have, it's actually an international group, but they just happen to be locally in Portland. So we have nice access to them here. Do you know, Becky, if Marion can provide anything for folks that are down Valley?
As far as I know, we don't have signs available right now, but I think that's something we could probably be looking into in the future, for
Oh,
sure.
I just saw Heath put a little link to a pollinator sign from Xerces.
Oh, great. So you had mentioned, I think, picking up or coming to your office to purchase one of your books. Where is your office located?
That's funny that you asked that. I was just sharing with Becky before we started that we're in a move right now. So currently we're in Montgomery Park, which is in Northwest Portland, but we're about to be moving to a new office on Southwest Kelly and Southwest Portland. Basically we're in Portland, but so if it's convenient for you to come by and pick one up, that's an option. But you also could just pay postage to get them mailed to you. And I want to say, I think the postage is less than $5 to get it mailed to you. So it's pretty reasonable. And then of course there's the online download too for free if you want to pour over it just electronically.
Yeah, and that leads us into our next question was contact for getting the handbook. So I think we can here at Marion SWCD, I'm sure we can put a link on our website, or when we post this to YouTube, this presentation to YouTube, we can include that link to it. And then also maybe other contact information of how to get a physical handbook also. So we can make sure that that gets posted.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, I should have checked this before I start. I'm pretty sure we have an online form on our website. Okay. But if not, feel free to contact me with my email, or the person in our office that actually coordinates that is our coordinator, or our communications coordinator, Renee. Okay. But I don't want to give you too many emails to try to balance.
Let's see, what are the top reseeding annuals?
Top reseeding. Let me see. Let me think about that. I know, like from my experience in my own, probably like, let's see, Colomia was really, really big and helpful. Oh, the sneezeweed. That's a big one. Oh wait, that one's perennial. What else? Big animals. A lot of them actually do quite a bit of seeding. So I don't know why I'm having a hard time like thinking of just one or two. The gumweed does quite a bit. What else? I'm blanking out on big seeding annual. Clarkia. Let me get back to you on that. I'm still thinking. I might it might come back to me with more. Oh, I think you're muted, but I think you're.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
I
you're
was just
fine.
saying there are some more questions. I think it's great that we're getting quite a few questions in the chat.
Nice.
So next up, what are your lower maintenance options that you mentioned earlier as an alternative to meadow landscape?
Yeah, so I think for the most part, and it depends on what folks want. Some just want a native habitat feature that's lower maintenance. So in that case, I would recommend kind of per whatever's appropriate with the site, with the shade and what they're looking for, like a layered habitat. So meaning having something with ground cover, with shrub cover, and ideally even tree cover. And it can be smaller trees. We have a lot of like mid-sized trees that could be an option. And the reason why those generally are going to be lower maintenance for you once they're established is you just don't have as much bare soil. You don't have the kind of regular disturbance that might be needed. Certainly, a little bit less drought pressure because you've got shade established. I have some of like my favorite like aggressive native hedge type species we might like put in. So things like Nuka rose and Oregon grape and things like that kind of you'll see even on landscaping around buildings nowadays that can deal with pretty harsh environments, and you can have a pretty reasonable success rate in regards to mortality and whatnot. But it does kind of depend on if the landlord's willing to kind of have that many layers or wants to have trees or not. But even just having shrubs that are kind of, especially ones that are evergreen, provide a lot more stability on your landscape and a lot less work.
Right. So next up, we have a question that's related to one of our recent Weeds of the Month here for Marion SWCD. Let's see. Do you have any experience or examples of getting this technique to work in an area around Tree of Heaven? My neighbor has mature trees that have killed off much of the area on my property where the roots have reached. My neighbor is not willing to get rid of the trees, so I'm trying to do my best.
Bring your neighbor some pie and ask, please. No. Yeah, so Tree of Heaven sounds like you already know can be really problematic with establishment of a lot of plants. For those of you that might not be familiar with that species, it's an invasive tree that will readily seed and sucker, and the biggest issue with it, however, is it's allelopathic, and so it can alter the soil chemistry in a way that disallows other plants from growing beneath it. So so that's hard. I do not have any examples of doing meadowscaping and or other plant establishment under Tree of Heaven. But I would just say maybe trial by error. keep trying, seeing what you can do, knowing that pressure is going to be there from your neighbors. I welcome any crowdsource information of anybody that has been successful in doing that. Sorry, I don't have a good answer for that one.
That's a tough one. We do have time for just a couple more questions, and here's one. How do you deal with annual flowers once they have bloomed and died? Just pull them out, or do you have a nifty idea? I have an area in the backyard with native annuals, lots of dead stalks, and with seeds right now.
Well, the dead stalks and the seeds are if you wanted to be able to reseed and leave those dead stalks if they're not aesthetically bothering you, are great. And also just even piling them is also great for wildlife specifically. So all of that is just kind of structure and helpful. Depending on the stalks, if they have like nice hollow cavities, they might even end up getting used by other insects for nests and whatnot. So it is really nice to leave those on site. And the biggest thing I would say is do not dig them up, ideally, solely because then you're just disturbing that soil, of course. But one thing I like to do sometimes, just to kind of get things to lay flat if I'm trying to get other stuff to come up is simply go through, it sounds arduous, and clip it with some scissors and just kind of let that lay flat, because that is helping protect your soil and providing habitat. So that's not too nifty, but that's certainly a tact for sure. But it doesn't hurt anything to kind of let them go to seed and just leave them where they are.
I didn't get to this comment until I just got further down in the questions, but we got an answer to the burrito question.
Oh, good.
It's a kind of a filtration system.
Okay. I'm envisioning something. I mean, it's probably like another name for a French drain, because it's kind of like you wrap it with a with a liner, have the rock, and then you've got the pipe in the middle. So I can see it being called a burrito.
Makes sense, like a burrito. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What are some good low growing ground cover for full sun area that would be low maintenance for a lawn alternative?
Yeah. A couple of things come to mind immediately. So our strawberries are great. They're wonderful spreaders, low maintenance. They'll allow even for some, getting stepped on. Also kinnikinnick, same thing. And then also, if you're interested, there's some different, oh goodness, what are those called? Sedums that you could consider if you like the looks of those. If you're familiar with like eco roofs, you often see those spreading about. Those three are kind of like nice, low growing, spreading species that pop into my mind.
And our last question, is there a good resource for learning to collect the seeds from my native pollinator garden that is growing?
Ooh, probably. There's more and more seed collection that's happening all over the place, which is wonderful. My go-to group for how to kind of collect seed would be Metro, which is our like regional government authority, and they have a wonderful person at their nursery there.
Concludes our questions. So I just want to thank Mary once again for joining us today.